that is expected to make landfall later this afternoon.
It's Wednesday, September 28th. Ian was never invited. Well, now he's coming even sooner than expected. We start here. Officials along the Florida coast are making their final preparations for hurricane landfall.
You are kind of on your own until it is safe for us to get to you.
Talk to an emergency planner whose community rests right on the water that's about to rise. Europe's done relying on Russian gas. Well, guess who might have just started blowing up gas pipelines?
Very less than subtle threat, but that's sort of the Russian MO.
Whispers of sabotage are growing louder. And could a miscarriage land you behind bars?
In some cases, charging them with murder if their unborn baby dies because of some harm that they had a hand in.
We'll hear from the women who have already been prosecuted, and more are on the way. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Just a few days ago, if you were in southern Florida looking at what was then Tropical Storm Ian, it wouldn't look like you had a ton to worry about.
There's very little model support at this point in time for a direct landfall in southwest Florida.
Some forecasts at the time had it hitting the Florida panhandle up north sometime early Friday. So even if the forecasts were wrong, you might have figured you still had some time to evacuate. Well, then the system started veering to the right.
That is what the concern is right now. What happens along the Gulf Coast? That is good news for Tampa Bay, but bad news because so many in the area between Sarasota and Fort Myers, it is a very, very populated area.
Suddenly, cities on the west coast of Florida along the Gulf were looking at potentially Thursday night. Now, at this hour, Hurricane Ian is on track to slam into the state this afternoon. And instead of the northern part of the state, it's cities like Tampa and even Cape Coral, Florida, further south, looking to take direct hits.
We don't know, so we're just going to trust God and do what we need to do.
And the thing about Cape Coral, similar to Tampa, is that it's not necessarily built to withstand this type of storm. It sits on this big bay. The Caloosahatchee River travels inland towards cities like Fort Myers, along with hundreds and hundreds of canals. On a normal day, it is astounding how flat everything seems. There are actually very few plots of land sitting more than 30 feet above sea level. The only reason it all works is because the water level pretty much stays where it is. But if a storm comes in and pushes millions and millions of gallons of seawater into those waterways, the concern is the entire region, from Cape Coral to Fort Myers and beyond, could soon be underwater. So, with hours before landfall, I want to start the day with one of the officials in Florida who's trying to prevent a potential emergency from becoming a catastrophe. Christy Matthews is the Emergency Management Coordinator for Fort Myers, Florida. Ms. Matthews, at this point, what kind of impact are you expecting there?
We are expecting to feel quite a bit of impact, at least some tropical storm force winds, potentially some storm surge, definitely some flooding. We are preparing for worst case scenario at this point.
If people are told to evacuate by their local officials, please listen to them. The decision you choose to make may mean the difference between life and death.
Downtown Fort Myers is a very beautiful historic district right on the Caloosahatchee River. And so any kind of storm surge will impact a significant portion of our city and our downtown area.
Yeah, when we're talking about a community like Fort Myers, like up sort of on the waterfront in the middle of this river that doesn't go anywhere else but you guys, like what would a storm surge end up looking like? Like how far in could the water go? It
would depend on a bunch of different factors. We currently have a evacuation zone map out there in the Lee County EOC website, and we are evacuating all of Zone A and Zone B, but it does come quite far inward.
Right. And a while back, it was, I guess, maybe less clear that this might directly hit you guys. Are there people that you're worried will be caught off guard here?
At this point, we are not worried anyone will be caught off guard. We have put out quite a bit of social media. We also have had our fire and police officers out in those evacuation zones, sending the message out in the neighborhoods, trying to clear those areas and sending out additional personal messaging. So we have made a full effort.
Is there a level of water like storm surge that is extra concerning? Have you guys had this conversation of, 2 feet is bad, but 5 feet is really bad? Is there a number at which it becomes a question of what you guys can handle?
Any level of storm surge is handled about the same. I mean, all storm surge is concerning and we take it all very seriously.
Okay. Is there when we talk about the downtown area, like you mentioned, is there a concern that emergency facility, like I'm thinking of like hospitals, police departments, are there chance that like hospitals could be flooded because of sort of how the city is situated?
No, our city is set up very well to where all of our emergency response locations, including hospitals, the fire departments, and their various stations, the police departments, are in zones C or further back. So they are not in any danger.
We have 5 urban search and rescue teams that are activated. We have Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission mobilized and ready to support.
So our public works team has been working very diligently over the last couple of days to go and check on our weirs, go ahead and check on the bridges, clear the storm drains, brace for that potential influx of water. They're doing all of those mitigation efforts to keep the water from standing anywhere in the city.
FEMA has already deployed 700 personnel to Florida, and the governor has activated 5,000 state National Guard with another 2,000 guards coming from other states.
It's similar to how we felt during Irma, but at this point it's a little less. It's hard to say at this point still, just until we have a little more definitive track, because the storm has been changing quite frequently. And so until we have a better, more concise view of that, we're concerned, but it's not anything worse than Irma for sure.
Got it. And you said there were mandatory evacuations in effect. Will they be enforced? Like, what would happen to somebody if they decide to just stay?
We're not police. We can only advise and encourage and get the information out. And part of that information is if you are in an evacuation zone and the roads are not clear or the winds are too high, we are not allowed to go out. And so you are kind of on your own until it is safe for us to get to you. And that is the messaging that they know.
We tied the boat down, took the cars to parking garages, helped neighbors all day long, making sure they were safe. It's a 8-story building. I'm on the 7th floor. Hopefully the water doesn't get that high. So I think I feel pretty safe.
40-mile-an-hour winds is our cutoff. We're not allowed to have any service vehicles out and about at that point. And we make that as clear as possible to the residents that choose to stay.
Right, and obviously a very busy time for Christy Matthews here, the emergency coordinator for Fort Myers, Florida. We'll let you get back to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up on Start Here, Russia wouldn't blow up its own pipeline, would it? The heat's turning up as the temperature drops after the break.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
in Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
'Tis time.
ABC News, America's #1 news source.
We've talked about the U.S. economy having a rough time right now, but you might have noticed that European currencies are plummeting.
And looking at the way the pound has been going today, it's going to end up in a complete catastrophe.
There are several reasons for this, but one of the big worry points for Europe is energy this winter. In recent years, the continent had gotten a ton of its natural gas from Russia via this really big pipeline called Nord Stream 1. There's also a Nord Stream 2 in the works. Observers had actually wondered whether this impending winter energy crisis might pressure countries like Germany to treat Russia with kid gloves during its invasion of Ukraine. That hasn't happened, but yesterday, Sweden came out and said it had noticed 2 big explosions near these pipelines. And guess what? That super valuable Russian pipeline is now leaking. Colonel Stephen Ganyard was Marine and a State Department official. He is now an ABC News contributor. Colonel Ganyard, the immediate suspicion was that some of this could be sabotage, right? I guess they're saying, what, Russia would be doing the sabotaging?
Yeah, there's exactly one country on that list of suspects, Brad, and Russia would be it. They're the only ones with motive. There are other countries that have the capability, but motive would be the Russian reason to look at why they would be the primary suspect.
How would you do, if Russia did this, how would they do it? These are like underwater pipelines, aren't they?
Yeah, there's several ways. Russia actually has the largest spy submarine fleet in the world.
It's a very rare thing that would happen, such a leakage. And the fact that we have 3 of them in 24 hours, that's extremely unusual.
They have the ability to dive down deep and to be able to do things like tap fiber optic cables underneath the water. They have the ability to do sabotage underwater. But a lot of those submarines are either decrepit, been retired, or in other parts of the world. So the thinking is right now is that what might have been used to do this was either human divers. The water around that area is about 200 feet deep, so it's capable of having humans get that low with some special equipment, or an unmanned underwater vehicle. We've seen a lot and heard a lot about drones. There are underwater drones as well, and they would have been able to place explosives at various parts on this pipeline. So a couple of ways the Russians could have done this. Interestingly enough, there is a report out that the CIA did warn the Germans last summer that the Nord Stream 1 and 2 would be targets of potential Russian sabotage.
I know our European partners are investigating this, so we stand ready to provide support to their efforts once they have completed their investigation.
Now, whether the U.S. was very specific and said we have good reason to believe that and gave them the means by which they derived that is a question, or was it just something, here's how the Russians would get back at Germany for supporting the Ukraine war?
Yeah, wait, I was going to say, if Russia makes money off of giving natural gas to other countries, why would you blow up your natural gas pipeline? Like, what is the motivation?
Well, on one hand, the Russians know that it's going to be a long time before Nord Stream 1 and 2 will ever be opened again. The Ukraine war and all the things that they've done subsequently have made them a pariah, and it will be very difficult for Europe to be able to go back to Russia and say, okay, we're ready to accept their gas. So the Russians know that that blowing these pipelines up really isn't going to matter in the short term. But the bigger message is what the Russians are trying to get across.
That is using gas exactly as a pressure point to sort of put pressure on Europe to essentially give up the support for Ukraine in the Ukraine war.
There are other pipelines. There are other pipelines that don't come from Russia that carry natural gas under the Baltics. And specifically, on the day that the Danes were kicking off a pipeline bringing natural gas from Norway through Denmark into Europe was the same day that these explosions occurred. There are no coincidences.
Oh, like even if we're not giving your gas, like nice pipelines you got from those other countries, shame if something would happen to those.
Oh, yeah. Very less than subtle threat. But that's sort of the Russian MO.
And then can you just describe overall the importance of natural gas in Europe, this imported natural gas? Like, what is it used for? It's just heating systems around the house? Why do they care so much?
So natural gas is absolutely essential to the European economy and basics like keeping people warm in the winter and cold in the summer. So as Russia shuts down the gas that it sends into Europe, Europe has had to look for alternative sources. Europe is in a real bind here because they don't have the supplies they normally would have to make it through the winter. And so they're having to fill up their storage and make sure that there's enough just to get through winter. And in the meantime, they have to go out and find alternative sources of energy.
I think it's obvious that there's some sort of recession coming, right? If it's not already here, we just have to work through it. I think it depends on how long it lasts.
So it's a very, very difficult situation for the Europeans, puts them in a tough position, which is exactly what Putin wants to do. He wants to turn the screws on European politicians by causing suffering of European people.
All right, so Colonel Stephen Gainder, fascinating moment here and pretty scary, I assume, if you're wondering if your heater is going to work in Europe this winter. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
With the fall of Roe v. Wade, it's clear that we will see more prosecution of doctors providing abortions and perhaps even women seeking them. But one of the big questions has been, in a state where abortion is now illegal, could women be prosecuted for having a simple miscarriage? Remember, for millions of families, a miscarriage is one of the most devastating moments of their lives. But even before this year's Supreme Court decision, hundreds of American women have been prosecuted over what officials say are the death of their children. ABC senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer has been speaking to some of these women who say this is just the beginning. And Devin, Can you just start by explaining why would someone get prosecuted for a miscarriage in the first place?
Well, a lot of states, Brad, have murder laws on the books that explicitly mention the fetus as being covered under those laws. And they were passed in the 60s, 70s, some in the 80s to really protect women from third-party attacks, domestic abusers, perhaps you get hit by a drunk driver, kills your child. Those women can seek a penalty, seek justice for their baby that was killed. But what we started to see, according to pregnancy advocates over the past 15 years specifically, is local prosecutors starting to use those laws to go after women who have some level of alleged complicity in a miscarriage or stillbirth. Things like taking drugs, perhaps falling down the stairs, failing to put on a seatbelt when driving and getting into a car accident, killing their unborn child. All of those sorts of cases have been prosecuted in recent years.
It is something that I don't think people think about when they think about issues surrounding abortion access.
The real concern among pregnancy advocates and public health officials is that in the wake of Roe falling, a number of states now and local prosecutors will take a fresh look at going after women and in some cases charging them with murder if their unborn baby dies because of some harm that they had a hand in.
And as Justice Alito has said, that states have a legitimate interest now in prenatal life at all stages of development. And we worry that with restrictions on abortion access and the popularization and the normalization of this concept of fetal personhood, we will see more and more policing of pregnancy.
It was striking, Devin, to hear you talk to women and officials in California, where abortion is not on the verge of being criminalized, but this really is sort of a 50-state issue even before Dobbs.
That's right. I mean, California, you would never imagine that a prosecutor would be putting women behind bars for a miscarriage or a stillbirth, but that's exactly what happened to Chelsea Becker.
Very traumatic, nightmarish experience.
What was the worst part?
The worst part was not knowing if I would ever have freedom again.
She was 25 years old back in 2019, and she was struggling in her fourth pregnancy. She was homeless at the time. She was addicted to methamphetamine. She had a very troubled upbringing in Hanford, which is a rural community in California's conservative Central Valley.
Did you ever seek help to stop using?
Not wholeheartedly. I kind of just ignored that I had a problem. I felt like, once the baby would come, that everything would snap into place.
One day, 38 weeks into her pregnancy, she suffered a devastating loss. She was bleeding profusely, she told me. She went into the hospital, and the doctors did what they could, but they informed her that she had lost a son that she had hoped to name Zachariah.
And at that point, I think everything just kind of went black for me. I was in a state of shock, and I very much dissociated from that situation.
You just shut down?
Yeah, I shut down. It was like I wasn't present in my body at that point.
And it was a tragic story, Brad, that took another turn when police were called into the case and began to investigate and found out that not just Chelsea, but her child, unborn child, had traces of methamphetamine in their system, and the local prosecutor decided to bring charges against her for murder.
If these women were to inject their one-day-old baby with a needle with these drugs, everybody would be up in arms.
So the Kings County District Attorney, a guy named Keith Fagundes, brought the charges against Chelsea Becker. He also, a couple years earlier, Brad, had prosecuted a woman named Adora Perez. She was also high on meth during her pregnancy, lost a child. 2 women behind bars, 1 local district attorney. It's the first time in 30 years in California that women had been sent to jail for a pregnancy outcome.
You told me that these prosecutions were not about, in your words, exacting a pound of flesh.
That's true.
From these women. You weren't out for retribution. What was the goal?
The goal was to get them clean. We can't bring these dead babies back. We can't undo the harm they did to the other children that they've given birth to under drugs. We can try to stop their conduct from moving forward.
And he said prison was the way to dry them out, and he claims credit for the fact that both women have turned their lives around.
Do you think it actually helped you get sober to go through it?
To be prosecuted? I think that what helped me to stay sober was having people that believed that I could be sober, that I could have a better life. You know, drugs are available in prison.
California is now trying to clarify their law that this was never their intent. The state legislature is trying to update their penal code to make clear that prosecutors shouldn't be bringing these cases. But this is a trend, and the fact that it's happening in California really has women's rights advocates concerned.
Yeah, but Devin, I'm curious what happens to a woman who has a miscarriage, you know, who has this tragedy happen to her completely accidentally. If prosecutors are looking for criminality among women who are losing their pregnancies, is it more likely that those women get prosecuted when they had no intention of harming their child?
Well, so many of these cases, Brad, turn on intent. In Chelsea Becker's case, the charges were dismissed by a judge because he said, look, there's no evidence she intended to harm her child, intentionally kill this child by abusing methamphetamine. But then there's the case of Christine Taylor of Iowa. She was charged with attempted feticide after she fell down the stairs of her home. First responders said they had reason to believe she wanted to kill the child by throwing herself down the steps. She insisted at the time that that was not the case. The child survived. The charges were dismissed. But she later said, she told me on the phone, Brad, that she did throw herself down the steps. And she did it because she was mentally ill at the time. She wanted to kill her child. She said it was a horrible choice that she made in that moment. Now, years later, she's gotten help. She recognizes how horrible that was. But she told me that, you know, she didn't deserve to be put behind bars. She needed help. She needed a helping hand, as tragic as that case was.
This is truly a disturbing and heartbreaking case.
Marsha Jones, an Alabama woman, 5 months pregnant back in 2019, when she got into a fight in a parking lot at a Dollar General store. She was shot in the stomach by another woman. She miscarried her child at the time, but a grand jury, Brad, brought an indictment against Jones, not the woman who shot her.
The indictment says she allegedly caused the death by initiating a fight knowing she was 5 months pregnant.
After national outrage a couple years ago, the local prosecutor reversed course, but that's the kind of thing that advocates fear we could see more of.
Wow. So, Devin, what happens going forward? Because some states have thrown around the idea of personhood laws, right? They would have been completely unthinkable before Dobbs. But if a fetus has the same rights as a child, as a person, does that change how women will get treated and judged for miscarriages?
Yeah, more than 1,700 American women have been prosecuted over the death of a child during pregnancy since 1973. And advocates say most of those cases are in the South, the Central Plains states, where abortion restrictions have been incrementally ratcheted up over the years, Brad. And of course, that is now ground zero in this post-Roe America, where these bans are taking place. Personhood laws that give the fetus the same rights as a human being are starting to take effect. And 11 states so far, Brad, have very broad personhood language that give law enforcement officials the right to treat a fetus, any harm to a fetus, the death of a fetus, the same way that they would the murder of any other human being. And that's what's gotten these advocates so concerned, that those are the places that in the coming months, as these personhood laws are considered and take effect, looked at more closely, that we could see more cases of women being put behind bars, or at least investigated for the circumstances of their pregnancy failure.
Right, some of those women saying the investigation, the suspicion is one of the most devastating things in this very devastating moment, even if charges aren't filed. Devin Dwyer, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
And one last thing. Call this the updated version of Mission Impossible. In recent days, the Central Intelligence Agency has said it's trying something new. It's trying to be more transparent.
I can neither confirm nor deny details of any operation.
For example, did you know the CIA has a museum? Yeah, not many people do, because it's not even open to the public, employees and their families only.
The collection contains over 3,500 items, ranging from the A-12 spy plane to declassified documents and artifacts from CIA paramilitary operations.
But over the weekend, they allowed some journalists to come take photos of their new renovations. Among the most notable things on display in this museum is a model of the Osama bin Laden complex, which was used for planning the al-Qaeda leader's assassination. The facility also highlights the agency's failures, like the Bay of Pigs invasion and an American who was caught selling state secrets to Moscow.
Aha, there must be a mole.
They're also trying to redefine what has become the popular image of a spy. Outside Langley headquarters, there's now a statue of Harriet Tubman, a reminder that Tubman, who led enslaved Southerners to freedom on the Underground Railroad, also served as an intelligence asset to the Union.
She knew how to disguise herself. You know, when they're looking for someone young, she made herself old.
But if you're not planning on going to spy school just so you can get a peek at this museum, the CIA is also trying a 21st century form of outreach.
A lot, after all, has been broadcast about the Central Intelligence Agency, but no unclassified podcast has ever been produced by the Central Intelligence Agency.
That's right, they've made their own podcast.
Didn't you guys invent, neither confirm nor deny?
And I can confirm that, yes, we did invent that saying.
This podcast dropped over the weekend. It's hosted by two agency employees who, of course, declined to give their last names. But in their first episode, they interview CIA Director William Burns, who says he wants to shine a light on the agency's role and reveals he's a little less highbrow than James Bond.
Since I'm most comfortable driving our 2013 Subaru Outback at posted speed limits, and that for me, at least, the height of technological daring is when I can finally get the Roku remote to work at home.
The big question, of course, is why is the CIA making this PR push? Is it about justifying all this taxpayer money they're given? Are they trying to pass off secret codes worldwide through the pod? William Burns says there's a larger problem here, that Americans have grown less trusting in institutions, especially the most secretive one in the country. So he says he wants to show we can still believe in what we can't see. Oh, and if you're listening for codes in that podcast, the CIA is perfectly happy to indulge you, because one of the only things from their museum they are making public are some ciphers they've installed on the ceiling. Apparently these are actual codes, they actually mean something, and they're putting them up on their website, which, by the way, also shows off some of their other exhibits. Spooky stuff here. For all things Hurricane Ian with up-to-the-minute updates, follow us on Twitter at StartHereABC. Of course, check in on abcnews.com or the ABC News app all day long. I'm Brad Milkey. Oops, darn, gave away my last name. I'll see you tomorrow.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted.